German is a West Germanic language that is mainly spoken in Central Europe. It is the most widely spoken and official language in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, South Tyrol, and Liechtenstein. It is also an official, but not majority language of Luxembourg and Belgium. Major languages which are most similar to German include other members of the West Germanic language branch, such as Afrikaans, Dutch, and English. It is the second most widely spoken Germanic language, after English. One of the major languages of the world. German is the first language of about 95 million people worldwide and the most widely spoken native language in the European Union. German also is the third most widely taught foreign language in both the US and the EU, the second most commonly used scientific language as well as the third most widely used language on websites. The German-speaking countries are ranked fifth in terms of annual publication of new books, with 1/10 of all books in the world being published in the German language. German derives most of its vocabulary from the Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family. A portion of German words are derived from Latin and Greek, and fewer are borrowed from French and English. With slightly different standardized variants, German is a pluricentric language. German is also notable for its broad spectrum of dialects, with many unique varieties existing in Europe and also other parts of the world. Due to the limited intelligibility between certain varieties and Standard German, as well as the lack of an undisputed scientific difference between a dialect and a language, some German varieties or dialect groups are alternatively referred to as languages and dialects. History. Origins. The history of the German language begins with the High German consonant shift during the migration period, which separated Old High German dialects from Old Saxon. The earliest evidence of Old High German is from scattered Elder Furthark inscriptions, especially in Alemannic. For the 6th century AD, the earliest glosses date to the 8th century, and the oldest coherent texts are the 9th century. Old Saxon, at this time, belonged to the North Sea Germanic cultural sphere, and Lower Saxony was to fall under German, rather than Anglo-Frisian, influence during the existence of the Holy Roman Empire. Because Germany was divided into many different states, the only force working for a unification or standardization of German for several hundred years was the general wish of German writers to be understood by as many readers as possible. Modern German. Germany. When Martin Luther translated the Bible, he based his translation primarily on the standard bureaucratic language used in Saxony, also known as Meisner Deutsch. This language was based on Eastern Upper and Eastern Central German dialects, and preserved much of the grammatical system of Middle High German. Unlike the spoken German dialects in Central and Upper Germany, which had, at the time, already begun to lose the genitive case and the preterite tense, copies of Luther's Bible featured a long list of glosses for each region that translated words which were unknown in the region into the regional dialect. Roman Catholics initially rejected Luther's translation, and tried to create their own Catholic standard of the German language. The difference in relation to Protestant German was minimal. It was not until the middle of the 18th century that a widely accepted standard was created, ending the period of early New High German. Until about 1800, Standard German was mainly a written language in urban northern Germany. The local Low German dialects were spoken. Standard German, which was markedly different, was often learned as a foreign language with uncertain pronunciation. Northern German pronunciation was considered the standard in prescriptive pronunciation guides though, however, the actual pronunciation of Standard German varies from region to region. Austrian Empire German was the language of commerce and government in the Habsburg Empire, which encompassed a large area of Central and Eastern Europe. Until the mid-19th century, it was essentially the language of townspeople throughout most of the empire. Its use indicated that the speaker was a merchant or someone from an urban area, regardless of nationality. Some cities, such as Prague and Budapest, were gradually Germanized in the years after their incorporation into the Habsburg domain. Others, such as Pozsony, were originally settled during the Habsburg period, and were primarily German at the time. Prague, Budapest and Bratislava, as well as cities like Zagreb and Ljubljana, contained significant German minorities. In the eastern provinces of Banat and Transylvania, German was the predominant language not only in the larger towns, such as Temeswar, Hermannstadt and Kronstadt, but also in many smaller localities in the surrounding areas. Standardization. The most comprehensive guide to the vocabulary of the German language is found within the Deutsches Wörterbuch. This dictionary was created by the Brothers Grimm. It is composed of 16 parts which were issued between 1852 and 1860. In 1872, grammatical and orthographic rules first appeared in the Duden Handbook. In 1901, the Second Orthographical Conference ended with a complete standardization of the German language in its written form, and the Duden Handbook was declared its standard definition. The Deutsche Bühne und Sprache had established conventions for German pronunciation in theatre 3 years earlier. However, this was an artificial standard that did not correspond to any traditional spoken dialect. Rather, it was based on the pronunciation of Standard German in northern Germany, although it was subsequently regarded often as a general prescriptive norm. Despite differing pronunciation traditions, especially in the Upper German-speaking regions that still characterize the dialect of the area today, especially the pronunciation of the ending ig as instead of. In northern Germany, Standard German was a foreign language to most inhabitants, whose native dialects were subsets of Low German. It was usually encountered only in writing a formal speech. In fact, most of Standard German was a written language, not identical to any spoken dialect, throughout the German-speaking area until well into the 19th century. Official revisions of some of the rules from 1901 were not issued until the controversial German orthography reform of 1996 was made the official standard by governments of all German-speaking countries. Media and written works are now almost all produced in Standard German, which is understood in all areas where German is spoken. Geographic distribution. Due to the German diaspora as well as German being the third most widely taught foreign language in the US and the EU amongst others, the geographical distribution of German speakers spans all inhabited continents. As for the number of speakers of any language worldwide, an assessment is always compromised by the lack of sufficient, reliable data for an exact, global number of native German speakers. This is further complicated by the existence of several varieties whose status as separate languages or dialects is disputed for political and/or linguistic reasons, including quantitatively strong varieties like certain forms of Alemannic and Low German, Plattdeutsch, mostly depending on the inclusion or exclusion of certain varieties. It is estimated that approximately 90 to 95 million people speak German as a first language, 10 to 25 million as a second language, and 75 to 100 million as a foreign language. This would imply approximately 175 to 220 million German speakers worldwide. It is estimated that also including all persons who are or were taking German classes, regardless of their actual proficiency, would amount to about 280 million people worldwide with at least some knowledge of German. Europe and Asia. German Sprachraum, the area in Central Europe where the majority of the population speaks German as a first language and has German as an official language, is called the German Sprachraum. It comprises an estimated 88 million native speakers and 10 million who speak German as a second language. Excluding regional minority languages, German is the only official, nationwide language of Germany. Austria, 17 cantons of Switzerland and Liechtenstein. It is a co-official language of the Italian autonomous province of South Tyrol. Belgique, 4 cantons of Switzerland and Luxembourg. Outside the Sprachraum, although expulsions and assimilation after the two world wars greatly diminished them, minority communities of mostly bilingual German native speakers exist in areas both adjacent to and detached from the Sprachraum. Within Europe and Asia, German is a recognized minority language in the following countries: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Czech Republic, Denmark, Hungary, Italy, Kazakhstan, Poland, Romania, Russia, Slovakia, Ukraine. In France, the High German varieties of Alsatian and Moselle Franconian are identified as regional languages, but the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages of 1998 has not yet been ratified by the government. In the Netherlands, the Limburgish, Frisian, and Low German languages are protected regional languages according to the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages. However, they are widely considered separate languages and neither German nor Dutch dialects. Africa. Namibia used to be a colony of the German Empire from 1884 to 1919. Mostly descending from German settlers who immigrated during this time. 25–30,000 people still speak German as a native tongue today. The period of German colonialism in Namibia also led to the evolution of a standard German-based pidgin language called Namibian Black German, which became a second language for parts of the indigenous population. Although it is nearly extinct today, some older Namibians still have some knowledge of it. German, along with English and Afrikaans, was a co-official language of Namibia from 1984 until its independence from South Africa in 1990. At this point, the Namibian government perceived Afrikaans and German as symbols of apartheid and colonialism, and decided English would be the sole official language, claiming that it was a neutral language as there were virtually no English native speakers in Namibia at the time. German, Afrikaans and several indigenous languages became national languages by law, identifying them as elements of the cultural heritage of the nation and ensuring that the state acknowledged and supported their presence in the country. Today, German is used in a wide variety of spheres, especially business and tourism, as well as the churches, schools, literature, radio, and music. The Allgemeine Zeitung is one of the 3 biggest newspapers in Namibia and the only German-language daily in Africa. South Africa, mostly originating from different waves of immigration during the 19th and 20th centuries. An estimated 12,000 people speak German or a German variety as a first language in South Africa. One of the largest communities consists of the speakers of Untitled Deutsch, a variety of Low German, concentrated in and around Wartburg. The South African Constitution identifies German as a commonly used language, and the Pan-South African Language Board is obligated to promote and ensure respect for it. The community is strong enough that several German international schools are supported, such as the Deutsche Schule Pretoria. The small town of Krundel in the Northwest Province has a mostly German-speaking population. North America. In the United States, the states of North Dakota and South Dakota are the only states where German is the most common language spoken at home after English. German geographical names can be found throughout the Midwest region of the country, such as New Ulm and many other towns in Minnesota, Bismarck, Munich, Karlsruhe, and Strasbourg in North Dakota, New Braunfels, Fredericksburg, Weimar, and Munster in Texas, Korn, Kiefer and Berlin in Oklahoma, and Kiel, Berlin, and Germantown in Wisconsin. Between 1843 and 1910, more than 5 million Germans emigrated overseas, mostly to the United States. German remained an important language in churches, schools, newspapers, and even the administration of the United States Brewers Association through the early 20th century, but was severely repressed during World War I. Over the course of the 20th century, many of the descendants of 18th century and 19th century immigrants ceased speaking German at home, but small populations of speakers are still found in Pennsylvania, Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Texas, Wisconsin, Indiana, Oregon, Oklahoma, and Ohio. A significant group of German pietists in Iowa formed the Amana colonies and continue to practice speaking the heritage language. Early 20th century immigration was often to St. Louis, Chicago, New York, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati. The dialects of German which were primarily spoken in colonies or communities founded by German-speaking people resemble the dialects of the regions the founders came from. For example, Hutterite German resembles dialects of Carinthia. Texas German is a dialect spoken in the areas of Texas settled by the Adeltverin, such as New Braunfels and Fredericksburg. In the Amana colonies in the state of Iowa, Amana German is spoken. Plautdietsch is a large minority language spoken in northern Mexico by the Mennonite communities, and is spoken by more than 200,000 people in Mexico. Pennsylvania German is a West Central German dialect spoken by most of the Amish population of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana and resembles Palatinate German dialects. Hutterite German is an Upper German dialect of the Austro-Bavarian variety of the German language, which is spoken by Hutterite communities in Canada and the United States. Hutterite is spoken in the U.S. states of Washington, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota, and in the Canadian provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Its speakers belong to some Schmittli, Larelit, and Darushalite Hutterite groups, but there are also speakers among the older generations of Prairielite Hutterite. Children who grow up in the colonies learn to speak Hutterite German before learning English, the standard language of the surrounding areas, in school. Many of these children, though, continue with German grammar school, in addition to public school, throughout a student's elementary education. In Canada, there are 622,650 speakers of German according to the most recent census in 2006, with people of German ancestry found throughout the country. German-speaking communities are particularly found in British Columbia and Ontario. There is a large and vibrant community in the city of Kitchener, Ontario, which was at one point named Berlin. German immigrants were instrumental in the country's three largest urban areas, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. Post-Second World War immigrants managed to preserve a fluency in the German language in the respective neighborhoods and sections. In the first half of the 20th century, over 1 million German Canadians made the language Canada's third most spoken after French and English. In Mexico there are also large populations of German ancestry, mainly in the cities of Mexico City, Puebla, Mazatlan, Tapachula, Ecatepec de Morelos, and larger populations scattered in the states of Chihuahua, Durango, and Zacatecas. South America. In Brazil, the largest concentrations of German speakers are in the states of Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, Paraná, São Paulo and Espírito Santo. There are also important concentrations of German-speaking descendants in Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Venezuela, Peru and Bolivia. In the 20th century, over 100,000 German political refugees and invited entrepreneurs settled in Latin America, in countries such as Costa Rica, Panama, Venezuela, and the Dominican Republic, to establish German-speaking enclaves, and reportedly there is a small German immigration to Puerto Rico. In most locations where German immigrants settled, the vast majority of the descendants no longer speak German, as they have been largely assimilated into the host language and culture of the specific location of settlement, generally Spanish or Portuguese. Co-official statuses of German are German varieties in Brazil: Espírito Santo, Domingos Martins, Laranha da Terra, Pancas, Santa Maria de Jetibá, Vila Povo, Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Maria de Herval, Cangagu, Santa Catarina, Antonio Carlos Pomerode. Oceania. In Australia, the state of South Australia experienced a pronounced wave of immigration in the 1840s from Prussia, with the prolonged isolation from other German speakers and contact with Australian English. A unique dialect known as Barossa German has developed and is spoken predominantly in the Barossa Valley near Adelaide. Usage of German sharply declined with the advent of World War I, due to the prevailing anti-German sentiment in the population and related government action. It continued to be used as a first language into the 20th century, but now its use is limited to a few older speakers. German migration to New Zealand in the 19th century was less pronounced than migration from Britain, Ireland, and perhaps even Scandinavia. Despite this, there were significant pockets of German-speaking communities which lasted until the first decades of the 20th century. German speakers settled principally in Point Nelson and Gore. At the last census, 37,500 people in New Zealand spoke German, making it the third most spoken European language after English and French, and overall the ninth most spoken language. There is also an important German Creole being studied and recovered, named Unser Deutsch, spoken in the former German colony of German New Guinea, across Micronesia and in northern Australia, by a few elderly people. The risk of its extinction is serious, and efforts to revive interest in the language are being implemented by scholars. German as a foreign language. Like French and Spanish, German has become a classic second foreign language in the Western world, as English is well established as first foreign language. German ranks second among the best-known foreign languages in the EU as well as in Russia. In terms of student numbers across all levels of education, German ranks third in the EU as well as in the United States. In 2015, approximately 15.4 million people were in the process of learning German across all levels of education worldwide, as this number remained relatively stable since 2005. Roughly 75 to 100 million people able to communicate in German as foreign language can be inferred, assuming an average course duration of 3 years, and other estimated parameters. According to a 2012 survey, 47 million people, i.e. up to two-thirds of this global number, within the EU claimed to have sufficient German skills to have a conversation within the EU, not counting countries where it is an official language. German as a foreign language is most popular in Eastern and Northern Europe. namely the Czech Republic, Croatia, Denmark, the Netherlands, Slovakia, Slovenia, Sweden and Poland. German was once and, to some extent, is still, a lingua franca in those parts of Europe. Standard German. Standard German originated not as a traditional dialect of a specific region but as a written language. However, there are places where the traditional regional dialects have been replaced by new vernaculars based on Standard German. That is the case in large stretches of northern Germany but also in major cities in other parts of the country. It is important to note, however, that the colloquial Standard German differs greatly from the formal written language, especially in grammar and syntax, in which it has been influenced by dialectal speech. Standard German differs regionally between German-speaking countries in vocabulary and some instances of pronunciation and even grammar and orthography. This variation must not be confused with the variation of local dialects. Even though the regional varieties of Standard German are only somewhat influenced by the local dialects, they are very distinct. German is thus considered a pluricentric language. In most regions, the speakers use a continuum from more dialectal varieties to more standard varieties according to circumstances. Varieties of Standard German. In German linguistics, German dialects are distinguished from varieties of Standard German. The varieties of Standard German refer to the different local varieties of the pluricentric Standard German. They differ only slightly in lexicon and phonology. In certain regions, they have replaced the traditional German dialects, especially in northern Germany. German Standard German, Austrian Standard German, Swiss Standard German. In the German-speaking parts of Switzerland, mixtures of dialect and standard are very seldom used, and the use of Standard German is largely restricted to the written language, though about 10% of the Swiss residents speak High German at home, but mainly due to German immigrants. This situation has been called immediate diglossia. Swiss Standard German is used in the Swiss education system, whereas Austrian Standard German is officially used in the Austrian education system. A mixture of dialect and standard does not normally occur in northern Germany either. The traditional varieties there are Low German, whereas Standard German is a High German variety. Because the linguistic distance to it is greater, they do not measure with Standard German the way that High German dialects can.